helping to inform parents about how to find safe childcare. It's about helping those providers and caregivers throughout our state to learn more about what it means, what our guidelines mean, and how to create safe and nurturing environments, utilizing all of our resources. And then the second piece of this is around enforcement. And the enforcement piece is around looking at our standard operating procedures, looking at our rules and our regulations, what's in statute, and making recommendations for systems reform to ensure that we're doing everything that we possibly can to make sure that families have access to high quality, safe childcare around our state. For many of you probably saw the news this week that a provider was arrested. She had a fatality at her site a few months ago, and there were 22 children in her care. The fatality that happened before this one, there were 17 children in the care of one provider. So when we're looking at enforcement, these are some of the things that we're looking at, like how do we prevent that from happening? I just want to also share some really positive news that happened this week, as that yesterday we had the bill signing for the Ellie Matthews bill. And thank you, Representative Young, for being there along with the other sponsors to really highlight the reform that will happen with the Ellie Matthews bill, which will involve posting cease and desist on our website for providers that have received cease and desist, including the first one, as well as looking at our fines. That's in terms of enforcement, that is a significant step in the right direction. And now we really need your insight and expertise to see what other types of reform that we can implement to continue on the path that the Ellie Matthews bill started us on. With that, I think that kind of just sets the stage of why we're all here. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. For those of you that are the panelists, you are all chosen because of the expertise that you bring and the diverse perspectives. And we really want to really have all of those diverse perspectives around the table so that we could do the constructive work that we have ahead of us for reform. So with that, I will hand it over to our facilitator, Laura.
Hi, everyone. I was hoping to do a quick attendance just for our note keepers for the panelists. And for those of you who are not assigned to the task force as panelists, if you would please put your name and organization in the chat if you'd like to share that with us, that would be helpful for us to understand sort of what our full involvement is. Okay, so I do not see Bianca from the Department of Law, Christina Walker, Clayton Early Learning.
I'm here.
You are there. Hello. No, Christina, was that you who said you were here?
Yeah, Christina Walker from Clayton.
Okay, great. So yes, Lorena Garcia, the Statewide Parent Coalition. Hello, I see you. Mary Young, Representative Young, I see you. Kate Jankowski. I think I saw you. Hello. So nice to get little waves. It's like a productive Brady Bunch. I like it very much. Megan Lotkuth from the Alliance. I don't think I see Megan. Karen Rosa, I thought I saw you. There you are. Hello. Amber Bilby, I saw you. Nicole Lynn Adams. Don't see Nicole from Douglas County. Mark Meckert. Don't think I saw Mark. Courtney Holt Rogers from Powers County. There you are. Jordan Steffen from the Ombudsman. Don't think I see Jordan. Anyone here representing Jordan from the Ombudsman's office? Nope.
Laura, Stephanie emailed to let me know that she wasn't able to join.
Okay. All right. Bill Yeager from the campaign, no. Katie Dana Poston from Early Milestones, there you are. Christina Heil from the Early Childhood Leadership Commission, there you are. Kendra, I saw you. Jade, I don't think I see, oh, there you are, hi. Joel Humler, I see you. There you are.
I'm here. Sorry, I'm usually not shy. For some reason, the camera isn't working, so I might just kind of shut down and reboot if that's cool. Thank you.
Mine did the same thing a few minutes ago. Adam Mormon, I see you again. Thank you. Mahogany, I think I see you there. And then Mark Brown.
I'm here. Hello.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, everybody. And thanks to those of you who are attending, who put your contact information in the chat. I appreciate that.
Laura, may I interject with one little tidbit about our panelists?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I just want you all to know that we are continuing to recruit for this group. We really need, as was brought to our attention and what we realized on the last call, that we really need better representation from the BIPOC community and also some more of our underserved communities. And so we have two groups that are working on that recruitment. And so just know that at our next meeting, we will have 4 additional members to broaden our representation.
Thank you for that work. More voices and more perspectives always lead to a better result in my mind. So one of the things I want to stress again that we talked a little bit about at the last meeting is we only have 6 meetings to try and really dig into this. So because of that, one of the things we're going to do today is have some breakout sessions based in part on the survey results. Thank you for those of you who had a minute to fill out that survey. I know it was long. So just as a reminder, in this first phase, our goal is to collect and review data about the role that each of you play in this process, which we sort of did last time a little bit. And then we'd like to try and figure out in this meeting, see if we can't drill down and come up with some specifics about communication opportunities and then barriers facing enforcement and reasonable goals. So for this particular time, what we're going to do is we're going to break out into small groups. And I'll talk about that in a minute. First, one more housekeeping note. As always, thank you for your patience as each of us navigates our own little technology hiccups. And as a reminder, this is a public meeting. So Lindley, I'll let you just give a few more housekeeping matters and then we'll dig right in.
Thanks, Laura. So panelists, just a reminder, if you're not speaking or just about to speak, to keep yourself on mute just to reduce background noise. All of our panelists and attendees, you can use both the chat and the Q&A if you need questions answered or if you have something you'd like to contribute. I will be dropping in links to those breakout groups, as Laura said, when we kind of get going with those. And all of our panelists and attendees can join into those breakout groups if they want to join. So just a heads up there. That's all I got.
Thank you, Lindley. I appreciate it. Okay, so in reviewing the survey results, which we will send to you, we had about 9 folks respond to the survey that are panelists, and then about the same number of additional community members. And I was trying to identify some themes there of sort of areas where we could, sort of grab some low-hanging fruit. The 4 topics that seem to be of great interest to folks in response, at least to those questions, were focusing on what we want to say and sort of what information we need to get out to folks, both providers and families, about how to choose safe care and how to remain in compliance with Colorado law. So whether that is the decision to become licensed or whether that is the decision to remain under an exemption, there seems to be a desire to get in additional or more clear information out on that front. The sort of piggyback on that is that folks seemed interested in the way we convey that information, whether it is additional clarity in graphics or easier to access websites or language that is to be used. There was also a number of questions about how law enforcement could support support this process and sort of how, you know, those groups could work together. And then fourth, there were a number of comments about financial support, both for families and providers. So we're going to talk about 3 of those in our breakout groups, but before we move on to that, maybe Mary Alice, you can talk a little bit about the early funding, about the financial piece.
Yes, thank you, Laura. So we're in a unique position right now due to the stimulus funding to support providers in a way that we never have been able to support them before. And so one of those funding streams is all of these are actually noted in Senate Bill 21-236. The first funding stream that will really help with the capital costs of starting up a new childcare facility is the Emerging and Expanding Grant. The Emerging and Expanding Grant is really targeted to support providers who can quickly increase access by just adding on changing a space into an infant toddler room or something like that. But it's also really focused on supporting small providers that would like to start up and becoming licensed. And so that's under the Emerging and Expanding Grant. Then part of our American Rescue Plan, we spent some extensive time doing stakeholder engagement with 9 different focus groups to determine how we could best financially support increasing access with the American Rescue Plan funding. We're finalizing those strategies, but they will be specifically targeted to helping those family, friend, and neighbor organizations or caregivers that are really interested in becoming licensed with some of the support that they need to become licensed, as well as looking at other resources for our family, friend, and neighbor network across the state and how they can create nurturing and safe supportive environments for children, as well as support for our licensed providers. So we'll be able to address a number of the financial barriers through the American Rescue Plan and the CRRSA funding, and we'll be posting that information hopefully in the next few weeks once we get final approval based on all of the focus group feedback.
Great. Mary Alice. So the 3 areas that we're going to focus on today for breakout groups, and we're going to give everybody just about 30 minutes to visit, and you can log in to whichever group appeals to you. We're going to talk about 3 things. Number 1, sort of the substance of what we need to convey, the communication plan as far as how we're going to say it, and then sort of enforcement partners. How are we going to take these regulations and actually have them stick in a different way? And that could involve additional involvement with law enforcement. We would welcome feedback on whether licensing specialists should play a role in this, or what that role should look like, or whether there should be a different group of folks who's in charge of this that communicates with licensing specialists. All those sort of questions. Now, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed like we need to solve this problem of the world today, even though I just told you we have a short timeline and have to move quickly, because at the end of this meeting, what we're going to do is circulate information about 5 different work groups. There'll be one on education that's going to focus on information to be conveyed and raising awareness about safe care that's sort of family facing. There'll be a second education subgroup that's awareness to providers on how to comply with regulatory requirements. 3 on enforcement that I call enforcement/disruption. So there'll be one focusing on the standard operating procedures that are currently used at the department and could be potentially shared with others. There'll be another one on the rules and regulations, and then one focusing on statutes. And then lastly, there'll be a subgroup on the fatality review process, talking about how can we as CDHS best respond in the moment if there is some sort of tragedy involving abuse, neglect, or a fatality. Now, I'll go over those again at the end, but I just wanted to assure you this first work group is sort of an initial brainstorming session, and you can kind of get your feet wet and see if the issue that originally appeals to you is one that you'd like to work on again. My hope, we're going to circulate meetings for 5 of those. I'm going to combine the 2 education ones for the first work group session. That will be on the 28th of June, and I will facilitate those meetings. We'll have Zooms. If a particular work group is all set to work on their own and they don't need my facilitation, great, that's fine. Or if you want to meet ahead of time or in smaller subgroups, that's absolutely fine. Or if you want to, for example, convene a number of your own stakeholders and peers and come up with written recommendations, you can certainly share those with us in whatever way is easiest. But sometimes it's just nice to have something on the calendar, because the hope is that the work groups will meet at least once for an hour and have some initial thoughts before our next meeting in July. So we'll have a full 2 weeks before we all meet again together. Any questions on that at this point? Okay, so then when you go into breakout groups, we're going to give you some discussion prompts, sort of things. We have Lindley and Mary Alice and Kendra have agreed or been conscripted, depending on your point of view, into sort of leading those groups. We'll need one person in those groups to sort of take notes or pay attention to what's happening so that you can report out to the group. You don't have to give us your notes, but just report out at the end. And each of the 3 groups will have 10 minutes to sort of provide their conclusions or questions. Maybe these groups will just result in questions or thoughts, and that's absolutely fine too. And then we'll return at 2:55. That's when we're going to return. It might be helpful, should we go over the discussion prompts ahead of time so folks can think about which of the 3 groups they'd like to join? Would that be useful? Okay. Are we going to drop the links into the chat for folks to? Okay.
Yes, yep.
Okay, so so for the substance of the messaging, the first of the 3 discussion prompts we have initially are, and you don't have to stick to these, it's just to get the ball rolling. Assuming audiences of families and providers, so assuming those are the 2 audiences we're focusing on, what information is out there now? What is missing, and what exists but could be presented differently so it's more clear or more accessible. So for example, this substantive question could say, we think there's great information out there for families, but the provider information is lacking, and there's a third audience that you haven't even thought of, task force, so pay attention here. Or it might be, there's great information, but it's buried on a website, difficult to find, or we need a graphic, whatever your comments are. Okay, so then for the enforcement piece, I would ask you to consider how can law enforcement support the goal of safe care, and what information would law enforcement need to support to identify unsafe care or to educate the community. Again, this sort of enforcement allies group could also talk about what they would like to see, folks in existing roles do. So what should licensing specialists do? What would be best done by a different group? So I would look to you for sort of thoughts on that. And then with respect to how do we talk about how do we present the substance of the information that we think is important? I would ask, is it important to this group? Or do you think it would be important for folks to have sort of a lexicon or directory of terms to help clarify, for example, that childcare homes are, can be licensed and can be safe care, right? There's no, or that exempt care looks like this. Why do we not use illegal? Just sort of whatever terms might be important for folks to have a constructive conversation. If we could identify in that group words that might be inflammatory to folks and should not be used, let's pick that out and identify why, so people can help the conversation move forward and not be stymied by others' language that shuts us down. How can we message the information we collect to underserved or minority or other populations in a productive way? How can we make sure that the information we think is important gets in the hands of the people who need it? And so we're being as inclusive as possible in that. And then what avenues or venues should we use to communicate information, keeping in mind that we need to communicate to underserved populations? So should we be doing more on TikTok, which is the only way to reach my 13 and 15-year-olds, although they're not probably your target audience. So should we be using more, more and different social media? Do we need graphics? Are folks really hungering for the actual language of the regulations and statutes? Just sort of the what avenues, where, is it a website? Or are they flyers, very analog? So what are the avenues? So that would be the third group. Any questions about those three groups for today?
Laura, do you mind if I just ask a couple people to join the enforcement group?
Yes.
I'm looking at you, Joe, and Adam, and Mark Brown. If you're able to join the enforcement group, that would be great, as well as Karen, if you'd like to join that one. And then the rest, in terms of, please also, whoever else would like to join enforcement, please do. But there are many on this call that are going to have strong expertise on the education and raising awareness piece. So we really value your time in those groups. And I think we're ready, Lindley, if you want to go ahead and add in the links. So to all of the attendees that aren't panelists, we really want your involvement as well on this. We have a total of 70 participants today, and we have 3 different working groups. Kendra will be facilitating the group on enforcement. Lindley will be facilitating the group on comms and on the more communication pathway, and I'll be facilitating the group on the substance of communication.
And one thing I'll say in the comms, it may be that in addition, I was thinking sort of avenues like which outlets. It also could be, which groups should we have partners with so that they're aware of it, right? So if there are other stakeholders who are not represented or who are represented, who, if they had additional information, could have access to parents to help them, educate them, nurse family partnership, those kinds of groups. Let's make sure we're identifying any that are relevant.
Great.
Okay.
I'm going to start dropping those links in. I did want folks to know what's going on. So we're doing this slightly interestingly, I guess. So we're going to be moving to Google Meets for our breakout groups. You can absolutely stay in this meeting. Panelists, if you turn off your camera and mute yourself, you'll be able to have camera on and sound on in the Google meeting. Attendees, I don't think that should be a problem for you since you are already muted and off camera. So we're doing a little bit of jumping systems, but hopefully this will work smoothly. If there's any problems, come back here, let me know, and I'll make sure we all get sorted out. But I'm going to start dropping in those links.
Thank you, Lindley.
Welcome back, everyone. Wow. We had a really good conversation. I see Kendra nodding, Lindley. Yep. So I think we have a lot to share out. So Laura, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you for that opportunity, Laura.
Oh, thank you all. I was sort of creeping around all 3 discussions, and I just was really excited at how I heard some of the same things in different rooms, which I think is sort of a nice signal that we'll be able to come to a place where folks' goals are met. And it's always nice to see, alignment, looking for a solution. And then I also heard folks disagreeing, which is also fantastic because that makes for a robust discussion. So I was happy to see all of that. So thank you all for being invested for that time. All right, so now what we'd like to do, we have about 30 minutes. I'd like each of the 3 groups, whoever's going to report back, to sort of tell us what it is that you discussed, give us sort of a high level overview, and then we'll allow other folks the opportunity to ask questions. Again, we just have about 10 minutes a group, so just sort of a high level. Again, one of the goals with these initial breakout sessions is to sort of get the juices flowing so that the work groups can really try and dig into identifying some of the specific hurdles and some of the specific potential solutions. So why don't we start with the information? Why don't we start with the substance of what we're communicating?
Thank you, Laura. Amber is going to do her best to share everything. It was so rich. So I'm really glad that we had it recorded. And thank you, Amber, for volunteering for us.
And anyone can speak up if I totally mess this up, but so we really dug into the fact that we need to really break down the demographics before we can really figure out how to get information out. The mainstream access, of course, is for families and for providers currently is like Facebook, social media stuff. But there's also in those areas that don't specifically cater to social media, they've got word of mouth in their community, which we need to get our information to where it will be able to be streamlined to get to different people in different tools. Our other was to focus on the number of vendors that we have as far as getting that information out, making sure we're reaching all the different vendors in all the different multiple ways that we can get it out, and that it's getting to the people that it should be getting to, and not being lost in a dead zone of none information. And then that was our other little thing was that our Colorado Shines information is very confusing as to what people are reading on that and what they're perceiving from that. So that's a side note. So did I miss anything?
Would someone from our group mind sharing about the education piece? Lorena, that was your point. I think that we had a lot of concurrence on that point as well.
Sure. That really we also need to have some point in this task force focus on educating Ffn providers and educating providers who are not ever going to be licensed, because we need to get to a place where we're not just doing like information things like on the buses or Facebook ads, but that providers who are caring for kids are actually given a skill set and the tools needed to provide high quality care, even if they're not going down the licensing route.
I appreciate that distinction between education and sort of giving information, the idea that that information needs to be sort of synthesized. I appreciate that distinction. And it sounds like one of the things you were talking about, Amber, is doing maybe some work at identifying who the influencers are with this information. So that would be the word of mouth folks as well as vendors. So I like that idea. Was there any discussion about gaps in the type of information that is missing, or the type of information that people, do folks feel, for example, that information about how to become licensed is available, but information about appropriate exemptions from licensing is not available? Any sort of gaps in that way that we can start thinking about?
Yeah, there was a lot of feedback on that, Laura, and having a visual of what all the different types of providers look like in a way that, and Amber has actually created a document that may be like a helpful starting point for all of us in terms of creating that awareness of all the different pathways for providers. Something else that came up in our group was about helping. This is on our Colorado Shines, but I think it must be too buried because I don't think anybody on our call was aware of the tool of the questions to ask when you're touring a facility, and how to or a home or anything, like what to look for in terms of like safe sleep practices and things like that. So highlighting and pulling out some of that information as well. Anything else that I missed, our team?
One of the questions that came up in the survey was someone asked, and I think this was a participant, asked if there was any data about childcare deserts and where they're located. So maybe either in this chat or in the notes or minutes or something for future, we can circulate the link to where that information is found so that folks can think about that, because we could maybe do some work around in areas where there are childcare deserts. If we, for example, start a discussion with the premise that those areas are underserved, then we can think about how can we message information to those areas, that might be productive.
Laura, I want to call on Katie to respond to that, because there's so much bias in the term childcare deserts, and who is actually providing support in childcare deserts. So Katie, do you want to take that one?
Sure, and honestly, this comes from a conversation Lorena and I had a few months ago. She reminded me that when we talk about childcare deserts, that you're essentially ignoring the folks that are providing care in those areas. Yeah. What we're talking about is a licensed childcare desert. In licensed childcare deserts, the people that are providing the care are family, friend, and neighbor, informal, legally exempt caregivers. So just keep that in mind as you're highlighting what where childcare deserts are and how you talk about them, because our system cannot currently serve all children and families, but they are being served and they are being taken care of by other types of settings. So having that a document that describes all of the different subsections of the workforce, that doesn't pit any of the different types of settings against each other. All of the different types of settings are important, valued, and needed by families. And having those characteristics of the different types of settings, centers, licensed homes, family, friend, and neighbor, and perhaps also helping parents to understand the types of questions they may ask to find a safe care setting based on their preference across the entire subsection of our workforce. That Lorena, if you want to jump in and add anything else, that I would invite you to do so.
You covered it perfectly.
Okay. Oh, thank you, Katie. That's a great point. That's a great point. And I think there's what I hear you saying is that there are, perhaps opportunities for better data collection so that we can accurately represent how children are receiving care in different areas, as well as sort of a language piece. So thank you so much for that. That's great. All right, any other update on this particular group? If not, we can go to, how about yours, Lindley, the sort of talking about the avenues for communication.
Sure. I think that we covered some similar ground to Mary Alice's group, but we sort of blended our first two question prompts in terms of, would it be helpful to have a dictionary or a lexicon of terminology? And then what are words that are really inflammatory and should not be used when we're talking about this information? Some of the conclusions that our group came to was that this idea of maybe like a dictionary or a lexicon is maybe a step too far, certainly in terms or potentially in terms of talking with families. I think, we all come at this from a different angle, and the way that we talk about things as, the way I talk about things as an employee of the state is very different than how someone who is not an employee of the state talks about things. How a family looks at things is vastly different than law enforcement or childcare provider. There's just so many perspectives in terms of this, but something that Christina brought forward that came from the Early Childhood Leadership Commission's communication subcommittee was, how can we be more descriptive and clear and plain language about what we're actually talking about here? So instead of saying illegal childcare, well, what is illegal childcare and what does that look like? So as Mary Alice alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, in some of the situations that we've seen recently, it's overcrowded or one adult caring for far too many children that is safe. So ways of talking about this that get at what is going on, as opposed to these very inflammatory words that seem to paint a blanket statement that every single childcare provider that doesn't have a license is operating illegally, because that's absolutely not true, and that's not what we want to try and portray. Some other ground that we covered was, when talking to parents about this, and I think we're really getting at some of the difficult roots of these issues in these conversations, but when we're talking to parents about this and explaining care, the worst thing that we could do is make a judgment call on the type of childcare that they have accessed. So if they have chosen and are using family, friend, and neighbor care, how do we make sure we're not making a judgment call against a family for accessing whatever kind of care that they're chosen? There is not enough licensed childcare in the state right now to serve all families, much less level 5 licensed childcare to serve all families. So if our communications sound like a judgment call, that a parent is making a mistake or treating their child poorly by not choosing a level 5 childcare provider, that's really going to just shut that conversation down, and we're not going to get anywhere with talking to parents about what safe care looks like. So we have to approach those conversations very thoughtfully and very carefully, lifting up high quality care while not making judgment calls against parents for the care that they're choosing. It's incredibly complicated and incredibly difficult. Another area that we talked about was in terms of, do parents have the words to talk about this, right? So if parents are seeking care, asking questions, looking for care for their child, do they actually know how to ask about what safe care is? Do they know how to talk about what care is exempt and licensed? And it's very jargony. So do they even have the words? And if they have the words, you know, at the OEC, we have a checklist that parents can utilize for when they go into a facility. Some of our local CCR&Rs have a similar resource, but parents aren't, you know, the access rate of those materials is pretty low. So even if we have the materials, how do we get them to parents to then help them have the words to talk about those things and know what they're looking for? And then we did shift our conversation into how to reach families and what kind of messaging that we need to use. And I think, and I'm so glad as a communicator that where we're really landing is this idea of the trusted messengers for families, and who are families really going to listen to. And it's not a billboard. It's not a message on the side of a bus. I think that our communications have to be more complex than that. We have to reach those trusted messengers, whoever they are, if they are family members, if they are healthcare providers, if they're trusted folks in the community. How are we talking to those individuals to be able to talk to parents? Because parents are so inundated with information. And then recognizing the complexity that a parent might, I think Jade, you brought this idea forward. Parents are getting one message from their mom and one message from their sister and one message from the physician, and they're all different. And they trust each of those people, but even amongst those people, they're getting different messages. So this is really complicated. It's really messy, and it's really hard to get messages to parents. So I think that our group posed lots of questions. I don't know if we came up with a lot of answers, but I feel like the good news is I think we're all living in a pretty similar space of understanding how complex this is and wanting to do a better job and do right by parents and families and how we talk about this.
Yes, Anne.
Hey, I got a question. Sorry. I'll forget if I don't ask. So I haven't had kids in a while, but I remember when I left the hospital, before I could leave the hospital with my kiddos, I had to go to a exiting the hospital class for parents where they kind of touch about feeding schedules and stuff like that. Do they do that still? I'm sure they still do some, but do they give out information like a little pamphlet on, hey, these are the type of questions to ask when you are going, like Lindley was trying to say, getting those, not knowing exactly the verbiage or what type of questions to even ask. You know, most of the time, in my experience, when we're having specifically child abuse or neglect that results in death in the daycare setting, it's typically infants. And so it's still probably pretty new parents, and having maybe a pamphlet or something that can be handed out during to those parents when they leave the hospital. So when they're going out as fresh parents trying to find childcare for the first time for their new kids, they have that information that you guys are talking about of these are the type of questions or verbiage to ask to make, let them make, a better, more informed decision.
Thank you. That would be an interesting sort of partnership to explore. What I'm seeing in the chat is that for some folks, they're having different experiences at different hospitals, and also sort of acknowledging that when you go home from the hospital, it's a lot of papers. So I think to the extent we can try and get that into hands of as many people as possible, so it's coming at you at the time when you're ready to hear it as a new parent. I think that could be a great opportunity. Parenting classes, great. You guys are smart. I think what we'll do for the work groups, we're going to combine the education, information to be conveyed and raise awareness, family facing with the provider, because I think there'll be some overlap in what we just saw as well. That the subgroup talking about the substance of the information had some similar comments and questions with the folks who are talking about how to convey the information. But I think at least for the first work group, we can combine those two. So we'll have 5 work groups instead of 6. I think that could be productive. But these conversations, I think, will inform what happens in those work groups. So thank you, everyone, for having the smarts to ask such good questions. All right, should we move on to the enforcement partners / law enforcement subgroup?
Absolutely. So we did a fair amount of talking up front to do some level setting. So what is current state? And kind of heard from both licensing and law enforcement about what we have been doing. What came out of that, I'm going to do like 3 really high level, like kind of takeaways from the conversation. And then by all means, people from our group, feel free to weigh in. It was a really robust conversation. We could have used about another hour, I think. But one of the first things that came away is surveillance really is the thing that we need more of, and we really don't have capacity to do it. The second thing is we really do have some limitations on what each role can do. What is licensing allowed to do? What is law enforcement allowed to do? And they're different things, so that's good. So there was some conversation about really how do we do more education between the two so that we're using each lever appropriately. And so really ensuring good communication between law enforcement and CDHS when they see things. To that aim, one of the specific things that came out was that there's a need to develop some kind of, I'm going to leave it broad and say tool for first responders, police, fire, and EMS about what are the licensing regulations and what should they be looking for. So that as they're going about their daily jobs, if they see things that are concerning, they would know this is something that I should report to CDHS. And then this came up at the very, very end. And so it's in chat more than a conversation we got to have, but it went to just conversations that kind of mirror some of what we've already heard around really being able to make sure the public can easily see and understand information on injunctions and cease and desist orders through Colorado Shines or some other mechanism. So even in our conversation, some of that communication and public education came forth. And then I'm going to open up, and anyone who was on that group that wants to share more, please do.
So one question I have, as we move forward with the work groups on this kind of topic, the way we currently have it divided up is with one work group discussing standard operating procedures, one talking about the rules and regs, and one talking about statutes. I wonder if it makes sense to combine the rules and regs with the statutes and have one group do that, and then have that third group instead focus on kind of the education piece to specifically tackle that tool. Is that of interest to people? Thumbs up, thumbs down, don't care. Okay, maybe we can divide it up on that.
Hey, Laura, I see Lorena has her hand up as well.
Oh, okay, great. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, I just, one thing that comes to mind in this is, given that the majority of Ffn providers are people of color, the idea of increased enforcement and increased police engagement is just, it's giving me a lot of heartache right now and a lot of like anxiety. And I think that this is a really great opportunity for us to look at some of the best practices that exist that for example, I think CLASP is pushing of enforcement mechanisms can be expanding home visitation to Ffn providers. You know, it doesn't have to be someone with a badge or someone, you know, in a uniform, but it can be more strengths-based and more support-based than it is like, let me come and check and make sure you're not breaking the law. And I think that that would also just be a more welcoming tone for Ffn providers in that respect than thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to do things right. But I mean, anyway, I don't need to go down that rabbit hole right now, but I think you all know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and
Hey,
that's,
Lorena. Oh, sorry. Laura, did you tell me to stop?
No, I didn't. Go ahead, Adam.
Hey, so I totally get that right now, especially with the climate. Lots of people don't trust cops right now, don't like them. And, you know, it is what it is. Unfortunately, it is what it is. But I don't think, I mean, at least for our group, we weren't talking about necessarily increasing having law enforcement go out and proactively like, hey, knock on your door, are you doing something wrong type thing. We were coming at it from more of a standpoint of you're just doing your day-to-day, you know, day-to-day thing. Maybe you get called to, you know, you're called to something just to have, you know, those type of things in the back of your mind to where, hey, if you see something, you don't necessarily, we're not going out and knocking on doors and trying to jam people up per se, but having that information in the back of our, you know, in our minds. So when we're just going about our day-to-day job, we know what to look for so that those type of information can get passed on to DHS. So, but I do get where you're coming from. I don't necessarily think that's specifically what we had in mind, but anyway.
Thank you for that. Mary Alice, did you have it? Your hand raised?
one of the things that we'll also have the opportunity to dig into is what other states are doing in this regard. And Karen, Rosa, and Mark have lifted up the idea of an enforcement unit. That we had to change the name of that though, speaking of correct communications, but Lorena, it would be staff within the Office of Early Childhood that are steeped in early childhood and strength-based approach to be able to support this information sharing and also the cease and desist and other pieces. So this is a really important topic for us to dig into, considering the points that you made, Lorena, and what you shared as well, Adam.
Caroline made a comment talking about registration of Ffn providers. Is that something that has been discussed? You know, so that way there are often children at this house, but they're registered and it's appropriate as far as knowing where Ffn providers are.
That's a big topic, Laura. So I think for those that want to become licensed or qualified exempt, and that we have the opportunity to provide funding for them, that is definitely a pathway, you know, to really support them and connect families to them. But there's so many Ffn providers that, like, why would my grandmother who's taking care of a young child want to be registered? They're just caring for, you know, so we can dig into that, but yeah.
Sure. All right, any other comments from that subgroup? All right, anything about the other two that sort of come to mind after hearing everyone's input? Okay, so I think the next step then would be our next phase. So the next phase, the goal is to have work groups meet once before our next meeting, which I think is July 1st. That's a Thursday. So 2 weeks from now. And the goal would be to have subgroups meet once before then. I think we'll do 5 subgroups, one on education, the information and that we'd like to share and how to get it to the right people. Then one reviewing the standard, the surveillance and enforcement standard operating procedures. One focusing on a tool for first responders just so they know what they're looking for, they can see what to understand. And then one on specifically talking about statutes and the rules and regs. And then lastly, one that we haven't really addressed yet, sort of in light of this, the L.A. Matthews bill, talking about the fatality review process in general. How do we as CDHS respond in the moment if there is a tragedy, sort of what that communication looks like and what needs to happen in a short period of time. So we will circulate Zoom links for all 5 of those. They'll happen at different times on the 28th. And then one of the comments we received in both chat and from panelists last time was sort of about the timing of these meetings, and that it's inconvenient to have for some of you to meet during the day. So we'll have a 6th Zoom session later in the evening that folks can come, and just if that's the only time you can come, we can gather information. We won't have a specific agenda, but if there are things folks want to talk about, we can do that to make sure that even if you miss the opportunity to have a meeting during the day, if you want to do it after hours, that you have that opportunity. In addition, feel free, folks can form their own sort of subgroups. Let us know how we can support that. If there are discrete groups of you that want to talk about a particular issue. Again, with the reminder that as we go into this next phase, our focus is what are the tools we need? What are the tools that all of you as different stakeholders need to make sure that we're keeping kiddos safe? So we're starting our discussion moving from a survey perspective and sort of a level setting to kind of a need identification, right? And then we'll try and come up with solutions for those tools in the 3rd phase. So like I said, you'll get links to Zoom meetings for the 28th, and then our next meeting all together, so phase 2 meeting 1 will be July 1st from 3 o'clock to 4:30. What else? What other information can we give to folks before we adjourn?
Laura, can you tell people how they'll find out about the subgroup meetings?
Yes, so we can send a link around to those who are registered as panelists. And then for folks who are logging in, who are community members, who don't get they all get the meeting invite. So can we attach it to that, Lindley?
Yes. So what I could definitely do, sorry, Marielle, did I just talk right over you? So what I can do is send that information through the same mechanism that we've used to share information about those meetings. That is our OEC email list. Let me drop a link to that in the chat so folks have that. If by chance they got forwarded this by someone or whatever, you can hop in, sign in for that, and then you'll know you'll get that information.
I'd also add, Lindley, the OEC webpage, if you want to put the link in there, that has all of our registration information as well as the minutes from our meeting and the agendas. So if you just want to, if your inbox gets overwhelming, you can just go to that website and register there.
And then lastly, to the extent that the subgroups don't, the work groups don't work for you or the meetings don't work, feel free to send us documents. Feel free to if you want to speak to your organization and talk to other folks, if there are overall comments you want to make, please get those to us, and we'll make sure that that's considered as the task force moves forward. The family home folks have put together a really excellent document with some high level and also very specific suggestions. So that is always welcome, and I want to make sure that the mechanisms we're choosing and the times we're choosing aren't the hurdle for you all getting information to us. So if you want to do it in writing, that's fine. Or if you want to email me and ask for an individual meeting, I'll do that too. Let me give you my email address. So that's how it was to all panelists.
I just want to thank all of you, both panelists and community members, for participating in this. I know that it's quite a time commitment, especially as we dive into the next section of really looking at the nuts and bolts of our recommendations. So I'm so grateful, and I just want to remind all of you that our priority is to look at rolling recommendations. What can we, as soon as this task group comes forward with an idea and we run it by our team at the AG's office, we can go and implement. And so we're not going to wait till August. We're going to start these as soon as we can. And I'm just so grateful for all of your time and insight into this process.
Thank you all so much. All right,
Bye, everyone.
take care.